But later she met a man who would become my stepfather, but he was like this big hardcore biker dude. He had killed 3 people in his past. He was a man very angry and a lot of rage, but he was very abusive to me. So I'm just this little kleptomaniac kid. And where'd you learn that? Unfortunately, from my mom. And basically from that time, just really became a criminal. From the age of 14 to 28, I was arrested every year of my life. At the age of 22, I was wanted in 4 states. But at that time, it was just, I cried out to God, like, if you're real, please help me.
Did you have any mentors as you're going down this path of burglary and drug use and drinking and mistakenness as a young person?
Actually, I had a coach that really loved on me, put his arm around me, and really spoke into my life. Like, I still remember the things he told me to this day. It was like he believed in me.
David Vincent, my friend, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thank you for having me.
Man, well, it's not just chance that you and I are having this conversation. If you had to introduce yourself to an audience who had not heard of you before, and they were asking the question, man, what do you do for a living? How do you respond to that now?
I say, my name is David Vincent, and I'm the CEO and founder of a place called the Warrior Center. And we reach out to men, women, and veterans battling homelessness, addiction, and other life-controlling problems through a faith-based rehabilitation program.
I would imagine after you say that, they either say, hey, man, tell me more about that, or they run away. And the fact that the audience hasn't turned the channel yet, they haven't run away from you and I yet, right, means that they want to know more, and so do I. I look back on my life, and a lot of the things I do today are because of the gift of what I've received as a young person.
Right.
It's like me trying to grow in my faith, trying to be a better husband, trying to raise better kids, trying to send them to better schools, trying to show them the better way forward. Those are all things I got from incredible parents. That's one way to figure out who you are called to be. Another is to go off the path and then to recognize there's a completely different path. I've done that as well in my life, and you've done that a lot.
Right.
So I want to just share a little bit of your upbringing. It's so radically different than mine and many of the other folks I do life with. You never knew your dad. Talk about that.
Yes, sir. Well, a lot of times, when I share that, it is a good lead in, because they say, well, how'd you get into it? And I get to share the story of, how I came out of a lot of those same dark places, and, my life was being transformed. And so, I feel called to try to help people. But my start, I say I was raised by the streets of Memphis, because my father, he walked away from me and my mom when I was 1. So I never knew him pretty much my whole entire childhood. And my mom was 15, 16 years old at that time. She got pregnant with me when she was only 14. So she was sleeping in cars and bouncing around the couches, man to man. So it was a tricky situation. But later she met a man who would become my stepfather. But he was like this big hardcore biker dude. He had killed 3 people in his past. He was a man very angry and a lot of rage, but he was very abusive to me. So if he'd killed people, you can imagine what he would do to this little punk kid, and so yes. I went through being beat with straps, slapped in the face as a small child, choked to unconsciousness, and just a lot of mental abuse. It was like he was always like trying to break my spirit. You're never going to be nothing. You're trash. You're going to go to jail and prison. He was, speaking that over my life, and he'd been through a lot himself. And so I understand that now, but then I'm just a kid. And so I grew up just in this abusive, crazy, dysfunctional environment. And then even to a level worse than that really affected me. My mom, she had me when she was like 15 and only went to school through the 8th grade. And she had mental issues, and she stole a lot. She was a thief, kleptomaniac. So she would just steal everywhere she went. So when I'm a little kid, my first memories are being with mom, shoplifting in a store, changing tags in a Kmart, if you remember that. And just all this stuff. And it was, best thing I can say is just that spirit got on me. So my first memories, man, I'm just this little kleptomaniac kid. And where'd you learn that? Unfortunately, from my mom. And I got my parents kicked out of a trailer park at 5 years old for running around stealing and putting the stuff under our trailer. And then I was 5 years old. At 6, I got arrested for the first time for shoplifting. And first time I broke in a house, I was 9. And my mom, she sent me down the street to do it. It's basically set it up for me. And of course, through all that craziness, then as I get older, like 11 and 12, I start having issues with substance abuse, drinking, or any drug that would get thrown in my face just to kill the pain. I did everything, but my worst issue was just the stealing because it just getting worse and worse, and broke into a business through the roof, my first one at 14. And basically from that time, just really became a criminal. From the age of 14 to 28, I was arrested every year of my life. At the age of 22, I was wanted in 4 states, including your hometown of St. Louis, Missouri. And I was worked through all that. But every year I ended up being arrested for over 18 felonies and burglaries, grand larcenies, and just really became a criminal. And it was just all of that, the stuff that I struggled with inside that led to that. But what ended up happening was I was in a county jail getting ready to go to prison. I was looking at 15 years. And for me, I mean, I had 3 little girls that I didn't deserve. And I'm in jail, and the wife I had, she divorced me, and it was deserving from everything that I was putting them through. But at that time, it was just, I mean, I cried out to God, like, if you're real, please help me. And I just prayed this heartfelt prayer, and I had prayed it before. I'm not going to lie to you. And you have the best intentions. But at that time, I can say I meant it to a level that I never meant it to before. And it was just, God, if you can give me mercy and get me out of all this where I don't have to do this time and I can get back out, I promise you that I'll help people for the rest of my life. And all I can tell you is that a lot of things happen that shouldn't have, and I would call them all miracles. And I ended up getting out a year later. And from that time, just by the grace of God, I feel like he had his hand on me and put people in my path to support me, mentor me. And it was almost like I really never had a father. So it's like God had to be my father, and some men I didn't know had to be my father. And it's like I got raised late in life, I feel like. But those years after that were awesome times of just knowing, struggling. If I told you I wasn't struggling, I would be lying. But it was like, it felt like I got held in that time and carried through it. And then 3-4 years later, I end up in a place where I'm empty. Yeah. And there was something missing. And I think it was because for me, I came out of this bad lifestyle, but that lifestyle was very adventurous. You talk about burglarizing, stealing, running around, doing what you want to do, drugs. And now I'm doing this church boy life. I'm going to this church with these people, and it was very boring. And I got a place, and I got my little girls back in my life. But after doing that a couple of years, I became very empty. And I remember just saying, this is all there is to it. I don't think I'm going to make it. And I guess, in my heart, I was just seeking to see that redemption, to have that adventure in life. And it was a couple months later that me and some friends felt led to start a place called the Warrior Center. And we started it by reaching out to the homeless on the streets of Memphis. Maybe after doing that about 6 months, actually by accident, there was a homeless couple. I brought them into my home. A year later, I've got like 12 homeless dudes living with me. And so it just kind of was this radical thing of just bringing people into a safe place and helping them to have hope and faith and to get them connected to a support system. And saw a lot of lives even begin to be transformed and miracles early on. But that's how I got into that spot.
Oh, man. So I'm going to take a big old swig of coffee while I digest part of your life story and also think about where I want to even go from here.
Yeah.
But I don't think I want to talk about the Warriors Center yet. I don't think I want to talk about what it looked like on day one after prison yet, or your trip to Burger King, which I've heard about yet. We'll talk about those things in a moment. Man, I look at my life, and a lot of folks think what I overcame is like monumental, like burns to 100% of your body, just struggles physically. And that it was significant. But I had examples beautifully pulling me forward at every single step along the way for decades. There was no way forward other than the right way. Like in the most beautiful sense of that, I just had such grace and goodness all around me as a kid, as a young person, as a young man, as an adult. You had none of that.
Yes, sir.
Like just it blows me away. And so we could pick on your mom a little bit if we wanted, or we could talk about her spouse and this guy who kills 3 people and abuses this little one in front of him who he's charged with raising. But I'm curious, was there any evidence of goodness, whispers of grace, teachers who showed up, neighbors who said, son, there's a different way to do life? Like, did you have any mentors as you're going down this path of burglary and drug use and drinking and mistakenness as a young person?
Yes, sir. It was a little bit later your own. I feel like that my journey was like all alone until I was like in the 10th grade. You understand, number one, I was a hellion. I mean, not only was I stealing, but I was starting fires. Somebody took me to church one time. I started a fire in the bathroom. They asked them not to bring that kid to that church for a while.
Tell me what that's about. Why was this kid trying to start a fire in the back of church?
Backing up a little bit, with all those problems that were just coming to a head at 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old, like I had never seen a kid so out of control as I was. I mean, from fighting, getting kicked out of school. I got kicked out of one school for 7 fights in one semester. I just had all of this anger inside of what was it? It was just, I was all alone and nobody loved me. And then the home life was just so just dysfunctional. And I was angry, and they took me to doctors. They diagnosed me with ADD. They put me on Ritalin. It began messing me up, and they ended up taking me off that.
David, who brought you to doctors? And
it was my mom. The school demanded that I get taken to doctor. But with me, a lot of times, of course, we know there's issues and people, sometimes it's DNA and they're born with it. A lot of times it's environmental, meaning what you're around. So a lot of mine was in the home, and it was driving a lot of that. But yeah, I once walked to a fire station and started a fire in the field next door and walked back and laughed at them come out and turn it off. I started a fire in my room and tried to potentially burn our own house down. I was only like 10 years old at that time. So I had a lot going on. So nobody wanted to have much to do. I was the kid, stay away from them. There was hardly any friends. So I was just, loner that pretty much, that's the bad kid. And that's the way now.
I'm amazed this loner, this bad kid ended up for a while with the preacher's daughter.
Right.
Tell me about that. How did you meet? How did you fall in love? And what was his reaction as you're dating his daughter?
Yeah, I went to this school, and it was actually like a smaller private school later on at the very end. I was at 10th grade or getting ready to graduate. And that's where I met, I'd say, my first mentor. I started playing basketball. Actually, I had a coach that really loved on me, put his arm around me, and really spoke into my life. Like, I still remember the things he told me to this day. It was like he believed in me. And nobody had ever really believed in me before. He said, "You're going to do great." And there's nothing in my life that would say that I'm going to do great. But I fell in love with him just because it was like he believed in me and saw something in me and really started speaking into it. And so he became like a dad to me. And man, I played my heart out for him. And I became a great basketball player. And really, I was playing my heart out for him. I really look back on that. But I led the city of Memphis in scoring and 3-pointers my senior year in high school, and ended up going for a couple of years and played small college basketball. But there was about 3 or 4 or 5 years right in there that I would say the demons calmed down, and I had a coach, I had a sport, and I got a hold of that. And for the most part, those were fair years, not as bad. There was still some trouble, but it was in those years that I met my first wife. And yeah, she had a father who was a former pastor. I don't think he really knew a lot, but pretty quick, he began to hate me once he learned some past stuff. And she was kind of a rebel and away from God. And that's how we came to meet. But we got married real early. I mean, I was 19, she was 18, and had a child a year. So we were very young parents.
You have a child, and then a child, and then a child,
Right.
and then you get sent off to prison.
Right.
And this is the time that you were referencing earlier where they had 15 years that they were going to pin on you, and it seemed pretty likely to happen. And you've shared in the past a conversation you had with your father-in-law. This is the grandpa of your children.
Right.
You know what I'm like? This is a guy who ought to be behind you. And I'd like you to tell our audience what this former pastor told you as you're going off to prepare for prison.
Like I said, he had a lot of anger towards me, but he came when I was in that place, of course, getting ready to go to prison. He came and visited me, but it wasn't for good reasons to say. And it was hurtful because also at this time I had that coach, but there was no one else after that but him, you could say, because he was a good man and he was like a father figure to me. Now, he didn't like me, and I could feel that. At the same time, he was a father figure. And so it's like her father and my father figure walking in, talking to me and across glass on a phone. And he just wanted me to know, he said, "I'm praying for you." He said, "But I'm praying that you go to prison for a long time. And I'm praying that your 3 daughters never see you again. And I want you to know that that's what I'm praying for." And so, yeah, it was hurtful. At the same time, I would say that when he came, had been already the moment where I had the awakening, where I had cried out on that cold jail cell floor.
Right.
And I felt like, and really things had already started to happen. Like I had some of those miracles started falling into place because I didn't mention this, but I wasn't just charged in one county, one city. I actually was charged in 5 different counties in 2 states. So I didn't need one miracle. I needed 6 because all these places and all these charges all across Mississippi and Tennessee, but they had started to happen. And he just looked at me and he said, I just told him, I said, you're wrong and this ain't God. And I know I'm getting out. And maybe I was being a little arrogant because I was angry he was coming at me that way. But at the same time, I already felt that God was doing something. But it was hurtful. And it was a definitely bad example for somebody who's supposed to represent God. He's a deacon and former pastor, church planner. But as I look back on it, he definitely had his hands full.
So, man, you spend some time in prison. You're on your knees. You're trying to make amends for what you've done, and you're committing to doing better once you're released.
Right.
And yet, for any of our friends who've ever spent any time in prison and they come from this background, it's not like you get out and there's just a bunch of white collar jobs laying down in front of you and limitless opportunities and cash for you. You leave prison with nothing and nobody. They shut the door behind you. Your back is not a prison. You walk forward thanking God. But what's next in your life?
It was a rough day. When I was released, I was homeless because my mom, she had some drug issues later on in life, and she lived in Florida at that time. She was unable to help me. And the family I did have, that was my wife, and we were divorced now, and she's living with her father, and she's already getting married to somebody else and pregnant. So it was a tough situation. So I don't have anyone, and I'm homeless, and I get out and I have $6. So I walked down to a Burger King and used my last money for breakfast and cried out. It was a rough time. I actually crashed and burned coming right out the door. And some of that was just because of the pressure. It was a tough night and there was redemption in that. But then I ended up, how the path that led forward, I ended up staying in an abandoned house. And I stayed there for a few days. And then I found somebody renting a room. And then I got a job at a restaurant, and things started falling in place. And one of the unique things, I then went to a church and ended up meeting a man that turned out to be my biological father that I didn't know since one. And so,
oh my gosh, man, I never heard that part of the story.
Yes, it's like God just turned his life around because he was an alcoholic, kicked out of the army, and a truck driver, and he came back to the Memphis area and then visited a church that I visited right out of jail. And so God used him to also help redeem me. And he was real supportive.
So you got to tell me, like, I don't have a memory in my life where my dad is not there with me. You don't have a memory in your life where your dad is with you at this point. Right. What is it like? A man who has made every mistake twice, at least, on his knees, crawling back into a church, and you stumble in through sheer chance into your dad. What's that meeting like?
It took a little time. I didn't know it right in because I didn't know what he looked like. And at that time, look, I'm adopted. So my name is David Vincent, but I was born David Donnell. And so I knew I came from the Donnell family. I knew I was named after my father, that his name was David Donnell. So it was really me meeting someone in a church and them being David Donnell and then putting the pieces together that what does he do? He's a truck driver. And then having this meeting like, I'm your son. But I would say it was good and tough because I was mad, because definitely when you're on the wrong side, you blame everybody. You sure don't blame yourself when you're in that situation. If I would have had this, and sometimes the blame is deserved, but a lot of times one thing I learned, I look at myself and what was David Vincent? He was an unloved, angry kid. You know what I mean? Angry at the world, and it was acting out because of what he did. And that wasn't right, but that was the environmental thing that kind of set up the failures. But in regards to my dad, so I was like mad at him. Half of me was like, where the hell have you been all my life? Do you know what I went through? And the not having a dad and, about my stepfather, like that's the way I felt. I didn't say it right away. We did have that conversation about 3 months later. And I told him in tears, like weeping, it's like, where were you? Do you know what you left me to? And we needed to have that conversation. But back at that time, half of me was angry and half of me knew this was God. Like, what are the chances of me walking out of jail and a little bit of prison that I did and walking into a church that I didn't even know if I wanted to go into. And I was there 3 weeks before I met him. And I was in this church, and then I meet this man who turns out to be my biological father. So I knew, because I'm trying to follow God, because he's the only one that's going to help me through this. He's the only way I'm going to make it. It's the only way that this dude is going to change his life, because it's impossible for me to turn my life around at that time. And then this happens. And so I sensed, probably is the best word for it, that like God was, he was directing this. And then as I talked to him, and we just said, let's go out to eat next week. And then I had a whole week to think about it. And we went out with him and his wife. And I learned about him, that I was his only child, and that he had actually, about 5 years before, had turned his life around. And he's a guy who got kicked out of the army, alcohol, 5 wives, trucking his whole life. And he had cried out to God and turned his life around and had 5 years sober. And his one prayer to God was asking him, could you let me have my son back in my life? So I think there was some redemption from him and redemption in me, and God directed us into that church that day. But from there, he helped me. I mean, they helped me get a better house. He helped me get a lawnmower and a truck, and I started cutting yards. And so it was neat, because I can honestly say, and he's passed away now. He passed away in 2017, but I can honestly say I would not have made it without him. So it's kind of, I probably wouldn't have been in some of the places I would have, had he not went through what he went through, and it wasn't there for me. But I also wouldn't have made it to where I am today had he not come back into my life and helped me.
I'm so glad. I have a picture of the prodigal father and son hanging up in my office, and I'm so glad he got to meet you again. And I'm so glad eventually you got to rekindle that connection and love. Right. You mentioned also, while you were going through your life story briefly a couple moments ago, about you were just starting the journey forward, and you brought someone into your house, and then you brought a couple in. And dude, like a year later, you got 12 people who formerly were homeless now living with you. Yeah. Walk us through that story, because a lot of times when you are in recovery, you ought to be running from the people who are currently dealing with the struggles that you once dealt with. And yet, instead of running from, you're embracing. So just talk about bringing these folks into your life and what you were trying to do for them and what they were doing for you.
Yeah. And I would say it definitely was a calling for me to do that. So I don't think everybody is called to do that. So any listener should feel guilty because they're not doing that. But, for me, I think it was a calling. So I had been doing well for 2 to 3 years at that time, and had some mentors around me and a support system. I had my father in my life now. But at that time, it was just, it was like, obviously, like, wow, that's like, wow, like, why would you do this? And that goes to why would we start the Warrior Center? And it was just this burning passion to help broken people, because that's what I once was. And so I know pain, you know what I mean? And loneliness and hopelessness and sadness. I know that. And it's a hard place to be. And when you go through all that, and I feel like I have the gift of mercy, like even in our programs and everything, like we give guys and girls 10 chances. They can come back again and again and again. Had one guy coming out of our program 9 times, but out from under a bridge, but he stayed longer each time and got a little more healing, and he graduated and got 6 years sober now. But everybody says David's merciful. David's always given chances. David's never given up on people. But I say, well, that's because of all the mercy I got. Like, you don't understand. Like, I got so much undeserved grace that I don't have a choice. And every time I'm dealing with somebody, like, I see myself in them, no matter what the problem. Like, I see myself in them. And if I start getting on my high horse, and I might say, that's a knucklehead. And I'll hear it. Like, what about when you did that?
Right.
You've done some of the same stuff. And I definitely can relate. And so what started it was just, I would see homeless people out there holding the signs, and I just wouldn't see all their mistakes. Of course, stuff they did, and 90% of the time, it's choices. Sometimes it's not, like health issues and stuff like that. 90% plus, it is choices. But a lot of times the choices are driven by bad environments and pain.
David, almost, and in fact, I don't even think I need to say the word almost. None of our audience have had the story you have. None of us, none of them. All of our audience, myself included, occasionally drive by individuals who have stories similar to yours. And we see them at the corner, we see them at the light, and then we feel ourselves reaching for the window and rolling it up and the locks and pushing them down and begging for the light to turn quickly. And that may sound cold and harsh, and I think it's common. What's your encouragement to those of us who are in those cars and we're passing our brothers and sisters on the street and we see them every day? Like, what is the appropriate thing that we should be doing for folks that we don't know, and we're trying to get somewhere, and they seem to be one more interference with where we're trying to get next?
Right. Well, I think the biggest thing is pray. So don't feel compelled that you have to do anything, because there's things to think about. Like, number one, I say most of the time, unless you really feel led and hear God kind of urging you, don't give money, because most of the time the money's going to drugs and it's enabling them to stay out there. And I say this from 25 years of experience. And so today I don't give money, but sometimes I will if I feel special leading. Another thing, you have ladies who don't need to put themselves in a dangerous situation, but I would say pray. And then in those moments, there are times that you may get involved with like a church outreach group, which really what I did, which a team that goes out and ministers to the homeless. So if you have a heart for those people, I would get involved with outreach teams that do that and go out there with teams. And it's really about building relationships, because that's what we did. Like we started going out 2 times a week and going out and feeding and meeting, and with a team of about 3 to 5 people, and meeting people. And then you develop relationships. They trust, you know them, you get to hear their stories. And some of them are heartbreaking, but some of them you're like, it's just so sad, because you understand, not that it's right. It's wrong is wrong, but you can understand, like, there in our ministry, we have a women's center, women's mission. We have 5 campuses today, and 3 of them are women's shelters. And so we deal with a lot of women who are coming out of domestic violence situations, prostitution, strip clubs, just heroin, drugs, just so the word. And when you talk, to a woman, and it's like, you find out she was in prostitution, and it's like, but when you get to talking to her and you hear the stories, what she went through at, 8 years old, at 11 years old, it just ripped your heart out, and you understand how they could get pulled into those situations. Of course, not everybody goes through those things and does that at the same time. Many people are fragile, and sometimes even the least little things can push them down the wrong path. But for me, it was just getting out there, and I think it was a calling. I felt alive. Like, man, I felt when I got out there, I felt like I was alive, like I had never been before. Because I'd just be out there talking, inviting people to church, taking food. And really what birthed the Warrior Center, before it ever started, I met this couple, and they actually, when I met them, they were living behind a store, and I was going out to feed them. I'd invite them to church and stuff. They would never go. And then I found out they actually went to the church that I'm going to now. And it didn't compute. Then why are you out here? And I learned some of the things of why. But I don't know. I just, once I got to know him, I said in my heart, I said, God, I will not rest until they are off the streets. And about 6 months later, it happened. And through set of miracles, and they ended up coming off the streets, and actually stayed in my house for 3-4 weeks. And then we helped get them in a house, and get them going, and got them back in that church that they used to go to many, many years ago. And then it was just doing that. I just felt like this is what I called to do. And I think there were 2 reasons why. One, because the life I came out of, some of that emptiness that I had. Now, this was like front lines. This was like a warrior going into battle, like bullets flying around, can be dangerous situation. You're up under a bridge talking to people. So all of a sudden, it was like an adventure for me. So I felt like it was just like, this is awesome. And then the other thing was the redemption side, that I felt like by helping people in this way, that all the bad things I'd done, and all that broken life, and all the pain I went through as a little boy, that it was like it all came together to this. So I'm okay with it. I can be okay with all of that past and all that failure and pain if it's helping somebody. And it took a while, but once I'd been doing it a few years, I wouldn't say this at first, but I definitely would say it now, that I wouldn't take anything back. I mean, I would take the family I grew up in, the rough childhood, the pain, the loneliness, the jail, the prison, the drugs, because it helped me to be able to turn that around for good and to help me.
I have so many questions, and I know I'm going to run out of time if I go down the wrong rabbit holes, but I got to go down a couple with you.
Okay.
First one is, you have 3 girls.
Yes, sir.
when you had them originally, you were in and out of prison and making an awful lot of bad decisions. What's your relationship like with those little ones, not so little ones anymore?
Right. Yes, they're grown women between 29 and 33 now. It was redeemed. I mean, I was able, once my life was transformed and in church and in positive role models and beginning life of ministry, I actually ended up with joint custody of them. So I was able to raise them. So their life, they knew of having a dad in their life. I actually was blessed by put them in private school and helped them all get college degree. And the third one is in flight school right now to be an airplane pilot. So I look at that and I'm like, just wow. And I know,
Dude, that is so good. I mean,
yes,
if your story was only about this guy who had none of that growing up, now has three girls who look up to him and call him dad, that's a worthwhile story and a good life.
yes, sir.
All right. So
Yes.
congratulations on that. Then I
Thank
have
you.
a question around, of course, your Warrior Center. You mentioned, hey, John, we started with one and then we brought in two. And man, it got crazy. We had 10 people living in this house at one point.
Yes.
Uh, Tell us about the work the Warrior Center does now.
So we just hit our 25th birthday. So in October, we celebrated our 25th anniversary. It's come a long way. And I sometimes have to pinch myself. There's definitely nothing. I can't think I told you this before. I can't take credit for all this, but we have 5 campuses in the Memphis area, 2 men's center, 3 women's missions, and we have 230 beds. The work we do, it's like a rescue missions because we're reaching out to men, women who are homeless and battling addiction. But we do that through a 1-year faith-based program. So we're trying to get guys and girls who need help to come out of those dark places and come stay with us a year, and for us to them to do a program and help find healing and hope. Over the years, we've seen a lot of miracles. We've had a few thousand people go through our program. Right now, with 5 campuses, one of the biggest things we're proud of is we now have 84 graduates. That's men and women who are coming out of those dark places, who went through our program, who now work for us in one of our 5 campuses. It's amazing because all of those lives are like me. They're people who the worst, the least, the last, the lost, people that most people gave up on. And now they've turned their lives around and they're serving God and serving others and just helping in the trenches. And that's awesome. But the program, it's got some unique things about it. It's got military structure. It also has a really good life skills and job training side to it. Like we even have a heat and air school in our men's center. So guys can actually get their heat and air license while they're with us for a year. And it's like I said, it's a special place, always getting better, always getting stronger. But it's touching a lot of lives in the Memphis area for sure.
Man, while I was preparing for our conversation, I'm reading all the old articles and listening to your podcast and trying to get to know your story and your heart. And I came across an article from December 1st, just last year. You were touring a new facility that you had invested in.
Right.
Man, it's a big facility. You're going to make a huge impact with this thing. I think it's an old retirement home, but you're going to turn this thing into a place that gives life back to people.
Right.
And as you're touring this, you're starting to notice some destructive things going on in the ceilings, which caught you off guard. And rather than me telling you what you saw and telling our audience what you saw, I'd rather have you just explain to us what you walked in on.
Yes, sir. Well, our next thing that we're trying to do, where our goal in our ministry is, we are trying to start a women and children's facility in the city of Memphis. And we acquired a building. It's almost 80,000 square foot, 130 rooms. And this building will hopefully one day house 200 women and children. So we have men's centers and women's centers, but we're not unable to help women with children. And we've always wanted to, we just haven't gotten there yet. So when a woman comes to us like 3 weeks ago and she's got 3 kids living in a car at a Walmart, we're only able to give her referrals. There's 2 places in the Mid-South to refer to, and these places have a 1 to 2 year waiting list. So what can she do? She's going to stay in the car, you know? And so we've always had a dream that one day we're going to have a program for women and their children. And we acquired this building and the keys were handed over, and we began the first steps, and we stepped into it. And just in the last week before they gave us the keys, we actually had some criminals coming in there, and they did a lot of damage and tore out most of the electrical wire, and they tore out copper, and it was an ugly situation, and actually did about $3 million in damage to this building. This building is massive. It's like a mini hospital. It's right in the center of Memphis. Great location. So it was hard. And we've even had a bunch of people say, just walk away. You have an out. This damage was done before they turned it over to you. The people don't want to fix it. So it became a very discouraging situation. Like we were like right there, but where we are now is we're not giving up. And that's we're working through the process, the renegotiation process, where they're going to lower the price and it's going to be pretty low because of the damages, but we're going to have to do a fundraiser to help get this place started. That starts in a couple of months. And I've told our people, I feel like, is there a need for women and children? Yes. Is there a better place to do it at? No. Well, it's a challenge, but we got to find another way to do it. So our way is going to be okay. It's going to be harder than what we first started at, but we can still do it. So we're starting fundraisers and getting the word out to raise this building up so that one day it can house women and children.
Well, dude, I'll be contributing. And as soon as the fundraiser's open, I'll be making sure folks in our community know about it as well. But I before speaking in all the other work we do today, I was in real estate development. And I remember coming into a building we were working on. It was in the city of St. Louis, and it was 6-family old apartment building, trying to turn this into like 6 little condos. And came in on a Monday. We just had finished all the drywall and it was just starting to look beautiful. And I heard this noise as we parked the truck and started walking up, and it was the sound of water rushing. And I couldn't figure out where that's coming from. And it turns out over the weekend that some thieves had come in, cut out all the copper, all the wires. And I just looking at this building that I'd worked on and almost got there, and now it's wrecked again. Like I just started crying. And I pride myself on being kind of tough, especially in front of my fellow coworkers back then. But dude, like it broke my heart. And when I heard that story about what you guys went through, I was trying to make money back then. You're trying to save lives and bring people toward Christ. Right. And I can only imagine the weight that you felt as you're touring this thing and you saw the criminals there, man. They ran out the back with their tools. Right. So we will be contributing to your effort on this. I encourage others to learn more about your work. Where can they learn more about the work you do?
They can look up our website. It's warriorcenter.org. That's warriors with an S, center.org. And there's information about our programs there.
Well, dude, I sort of whispered this a moment ago, but I'd like to roar it out a little bit more clearly. What got me to get back into that building and fix it back up again is I had to pay off the mortgage and try to keep the lights on in my house. For me, like, dude, go back to work, O'Leary. For you, what's that thing that gets you up in the morning and allows you to walk into a building that you know is going to make a mighty difference, and you recognize it's destroyed, and yet you say, man, time to roll up the sleeves and go to work? What fills you with that courage?
The potential to help people. Like I said, we've had even some of our own people. Well, they've ruined it for us, and I said, no, they haven't. We can't let them win. We got to take a longer road now, but I just believe that God is still calling us to do this. And the biggest picture I'm painting for our people, even though they were discouraged, because we're in it now. We have teams doing demo. There were 4 floors with all the water leaking. It created mold. So we're having to totally demo that. And so we're working now in faith, knowing that, hey, we're putting the work in and this is going to come together for us. But I guess it's just a dream of that one day 200 women and children will have a wonderful, wonderful place, a safe refuge to come. And so that not only mama can get her life back together, but the children can be in a good environment. And it's going to, we just, the picture of what that's going to be one day and the women and children that it can help, is like, we don't want to let it go.
David, what would you say to someone? This is my final question before we shift into the Live Inspired 7. Final question is for someone listening to our conversation who may not be dealing with missing copper in their facility, but they're dealing with missing hope in their marriage, or they're single and they wish it wasn't like that. They're dealing with an addiction. They're dealing with job displacement. They're dealing with struggles politically or racially or in life. And who doesn't have one of those things going on somewhere in their life, if not a whole bunch of things? What's your encouragement to someone who just feels like right now they are at that Burger King scene? They just spent their last $6 and now they're on their own. What's your encouragement to them?
The only thing I can say is what I did, and that's draw near to God. In that situation where my whole life was destroyed and shattered, I came across to this Bible verse, and it's in Jeremiah 29, and it says that God is saying, I know the plans I have towards you, thoughts of peace, not of evil, to give you a hope and a future. But it goes on to say is that when you cry out to God, he will hear you. And when you seek God with all your heart, he will deliver you of everything that holds you captive. So that's been my life verse. That verse changed my life. And that's what gave me the heart to do the work I needed in behind the bars
Mm.
to where I even have a chance at success afterwards. And so I'm a believer, like no matter what problem you have in life, the answer can be found in God. He says, draw near to me and I'll draw near to you. And so I think everybody's heart's different and that looks different from people, but it's just, it just takes a little faith. And I think to have that faith, to take that step, to draw near to God, to ask for help in that problem, in that marriage, with that child. And I've seen it work in my life, because what was I doing when I found that life verse? I started doing that with all my heart. And then
Right.
I got so many benefits out of that, healing from my heart, hope. I mean, I was a messed up kid. I mean, even a lot of my mental
Right.
issues started going down, and it just transformed me from the inside out. But what did I do? I just drew near to God, and I tried to be somebody who was a seeker. I mean, and I'm going to try to get as close to God as I can. Now most people say, I can't, I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough. You got to understand, I'm doing this on the way to prison for 15 years. And he received me and accepted me and loved me. Like I've never felt so much love in my life than when I was drawing near to God behind those cells. So I would just say, draw near to God and be a seeker of him. He's a helper, and he's a refuge, and he'll help. He'll give you that.
Brother,
Hope
I
is found in seeking him.
my father has had Parkinson's disease for almost 35 years and was recently hospitalized. It has been a journey. It remains a journey, a very hard one on him, and maybe even harder on his wife, my mom, who I'm just wild about. Come bringing him home from the hospital, though, I had to pull up my mom's car, and as I'm approaching it, it's far tucked back in the parking lot. Her license plate is JER29. So I pop into her little car and I just start laughing to myself, thinking about, here's this woman who's been really wrestling with massive struggles for decades, and doing so with joy in her heart because she knows there's a plan for her life. And so she and you have a lot to talk about. I look forward to hopefully connecting you two sometime. But here we go, man. We got to finish strong together. So buckle up, get your tennis shoes on. We're going to run the last mile.
Okay.
7 questions that have tethered all of our guests together. So question number 1 for the Live Inspired 7 is, what's been the most impactful book you have ever read?
I'd have to say the Bible. I mean, that might be an easy answer, but that I did a lot of that. You got to understand, when you're behind bars, I read the whole Bible, I read the New Testament 6 times, I even memorized 120 Bible verses when I was locked up. So I really have been someone who's really been in the Word. Like it saved my life and changed me from the inside out. So I would have to say that one.
What's one?
If that's not cheating.
Well, man, there's a lot of folks on this show who share the Bible, and so you're not alone, and I appreciate that. What's
Right.
one positive characteristic? I know it was a tough childhood, but still you had some beautiful characteristics as a little boy. So what's one positive characteristic you had as a little boy growing up in that trailer park that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
Woo, that's a tough question. And I mean, I would say that little boy was just tough, tenacious. So I feel like I've kept that for the most part, but I'll always need to, always be chiseled on and, get a little bit better. But I just, that little boy, he wasn't a quitter. And so I've tried to do that through life, but we can always do better, I guess. But I know I know that I wouldn't have made it through everything, even jail, prison and all that. And I'm not having a little of that along the way.
If your home caught fire and all living things are out of your home and you had an opportunity to run in and grab one item, what's that one thing from that burning structure you would grab?
You have some hard questions, John.
They get worse, man. These are the live. Get ready for the hard ones.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, well, man, I have in my office, I have a pack of some personal items. I would probably go grab that, but the wife didn't tell me to go get something else. And they are some old baseball cards, a couple of things from my childhood, a jersey that was retired at my high school for basketball. So you call it a box of some key memory thing. I do have that in my home office. So that would be it.
If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous Memphis day with anybody, living or deceased, who would you like to be seated next to?
Dr. Martin Luther King. I'm from Memphis. I've always followed his life. The year I was born was 16. I was actually born in the same hospital that he died in, St. Joseph Hospital. And growing up in Memphis, there's a lot of tension from his assassination, but I always just kind of had a kindred spirit with him and read about him growing up and followed his life. So I'd honestly say he'd be one of the top ones.
Well, about 12 hours before he was assassinated, he gave "I've been to the mountaintop" speech. And if folks haven't listened to it, it is a prophetic, incredible sermon that he delivered.
It's amazing.
What's the best advice Martin Luther King the Jr. or anyone else ever gave you? So the best advice you've ever received is?
I have a mentor who is from Florida, and he came into my life probably like about 12 years ago. And I would say his name is Stephen Strang. He's been a great mentor, and he lives far away, but I talk to him like once a month. But he has really helped me and grow the ministry, which is important because as our ministry grows, we're able to help more people and have more reach, touch more lives. But his advice to me has really been centered around, if you grow as a leader, you'll be able to help more people. Like, it's like your leadership. You have to grow as a person. You have to grow as a leader, and then the Warrior Center will grow, and you'll be able to grow your staff, and you'll touch more lives. So spending time with him, I would say I didn't understand it at first. I understand it a lot more now. But just growing as a leader of whatever you're leading, your family, the organization, ministry, is whatever it is. Like, you grow, it grows, and that was just some great advice that it was ongoing advice. How you doing in that area, and those kind of things.
What advice would you give to yourself at age 20?
At age 20. I was just getting out of a couple years of college. I was really at a place where at that age 20, where I could have maybe, went the right direction. I would just say, don't listen to the lies. That's not who you are. If that would be my advice to my 20-year-old self.
David Vincent, you've almost run the gauntlet. We got the final question right here. And it has been said, my friend, that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
In regards to my life, it would be that I was a person that went from pain to purpose, who became a trophy of God's grace.
Jeez. Well, that's a solid statement on the headstone. So thank you for being a trophy of God's grace. My friends, David Vincent was indeed a boy who endured quite a bit of pain, who made a lot of mistakes along the way, and who has become a trophy of God's grace. And he's not alone on that journey. He has a map that is something all of us can follow if we desire. And I just thank you, David, for sharing part of that roadmap with us today and for living it out with those that you serve in Memphis and beyond.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for what you do.
My friends, that is the voice and part of the life of David Vincent, trophy of God. My name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift. Live inspired.